Millions of Americans earn and use credit card rewards. A few big box retailers want to take those rewards away. Rewards we use on groceries and school supplies. The cash back to save on gas and grow our small businesses. And travel miles we use to make memories. The so-called Credit Card Competition Act would eliminate credit card rewards. No more travel miles, no more cash back. When lawmakers help mega retailers line their pockets, we pay for it. Tell your lawmaker to vote no on the big box bill. Visit handsoffmyrewards.com to take action today.
Indian scout, the Indian looks at John Wayne and points to the Union and says, he's a lion, dog-faced pony soldier. Well, there's a lot of lion, dog-faced pony soldiers out there about global warming.
The 2024 Republican presidential primary field is taking shape.
The battle lines are becoming clearer, and so is the field of candidates.
Is the odds-on favorites, if you look at the polling, still Trump versus Biden?
That seems to be it, but it's just way too early to tell.
I'm more angry now, and I'm more committed now than I ever was.
Big challenge for these candidates is going to be how do they navigate Donald Trump? And how do they navigate Ron DeSantis?
You and I have a rendezvous with destiny.
What an intro. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome to Ruthless. Do not adjust your sets if you're watching us here on YouTube. Everyone is out of the office on vacation except for yours truly, holding down the fort, and our special guest today, Jesse Hunt.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to fill in.
Yeah, well, I mean, everyone is on vacation essentially. Holmes, Ashbrook, Duncan, they took the day off, but I never take the day off, ever. I'm here to provide content to our wonderful listeners. And so here we are. That clip was Joe Biden talking senselessly yet again about dog-faced pony soldiers. You're lying if you don't believe in global warming. There was another quote apparently he had today where in Vietnam he said he was more concerned about the temperature rising 1.5 degrees than a nuclear war. So we have the experts on the case. Always good to know that, folks. But we're again here with Jesse Hunt. I'll remind our listeners who may not have been here since the beginning, Jesse was actually on one of our ride-alongs, and it was one of our highest-rated episodes. So when they opened, I said, why not bring Jesse?
Well, you know, that was I think we're coming off the Virginia Gov victory.
Yeah, that was a huge one. Yeah. You were at the RGA at the time. What have you been up to since?
I launched my own firm, Monadnock Strategies, doing communications consulting, political work, you know, everything that you can imagine that someone like myself does after
elects Republicans, essentially. I know you did that at the SC, you did that at the RGA, you did a great job.
Thank you. Doing a little public affairs work now. So I'm just, you know, excited to come on and fill in for the folks. I like to think I have better sports takes than any of the fellas that aren't with us.
So
if we do deviate any into that world, I'm sure I'll be able to provide a little bit more color than they normally do.
That's right. You QB'd in college, right? QB legend. Don't be humble about it.
Yeah, you know, I ended up figuring out that I was probably better suited to go into a career in politics
than NFL?
Yeah.
Not a bad choice. So, folks, we have a very exciting show for you today, and the first thing I want to get into is there was this article in Politico saying that is 2024 going to be 2016 all over again? I want to read from this. It says, pretty much everything has been said about President Joe Biden's weaknesses as a 2024 candidate, though not everyone has said it. That has mostly been fixed this weekend as a torrent of pundits weigh in on the Biden question. Is his age that's the problem, or the economy? Is it too late for a blue state governor to replace him? That's the whole Gavin Newsom switcheroo that, you know, folks have been talking about. Or is it that wishful thinking by the bedwetting faction of the Democratic Party? There's lots to dig into below and where this conversation is moving, but there's one thing we picked up in conversations this week, that it isn't quite captured in the narrow debate about age and the economy. The theory of the case from Biden world is that Dems need not be concerned because 2024 is the election they know how to win. It's a combination of 2020 and 2022 all over again, running against, quote, Trumpian extremism and the erosion of abortion rights. But there's a creeping concern among Democrats that the overall gestalt of a Biden-Trump rematch may not be so much 2020 as it is 2016. So this whole thing, to begin with, supposes that Trump is the Republican nominee after this primary. I think, first off, this goes for any Republican who would be running against Biden. I think a lot of Democrats are starting to realize he is way more vulnerable than they imagined. You know, it's easy when you're seeing a Republican primary to see, oh, it's all Republicans taking shots at each other. We can just coast. But at the end of the day, the vast majority of Americans are not happy with the way things are going.
It's easy to see how suddenly there are like an abundance of kind of like bedwetting stories going around the National Press Corps. Dems starting to fret about Joe Biden because they're starting to get back. You know, they're actually starting to be go out into the field and test some of these candidates against Biden, and they're realizing that there are a lot of folks who have the opportunity to knock off Joe Biden. And I would reject the premise of their 24 relating to 2016 comparison, whereas, you know, somehow the criticisms against Hillary Clinton in 2016 weren't valid and they should be dismissed, and therefore, you know, we're setting up this false equivalence now that Joe Biden's problems are the same as Trump's. Like, well, Joe Biden does have quite a few problems, and it's bared out in significant amount of polling that we're seeing, you know, from places like the AP, you name it. You know, it's not just Republican internal polling that we're seeing.
Yeah, so they bring that up in this article. It says right here, what they mean, this is from the article in Politico, what they mean by that is Biden's vulnerabilities risk being blown up as equivalents to Trump. In other words, what they would describe as Trump's megalomaniac incompetence is no different than Biden's alleged cognitive decline. That Trump's dozens of criminal charges will generally equated with Hunter Biden's legal issues, that the comparison of the Biden economy and the Trump economy becomes a wash at best. I don't know how that's a wash in that comparison, but anyways, it says, in this version of bedwetting, 2024 becomes another but her emails, just like you were saying, campaign, rather than another MAGA and choice campaign. I do think that it's becoming more apparent that a lot of mainstream Democrats really took this campaign cycle for granted. They thought, oh, you know, it's either going to be Trump or some other Republican, and it's going to be so simple to beat him. Biden's in a great place. But I think that shows a lot of just how insular their thinking is. Like, a lot of the Democrats, basically their beating heart is New York City and DC, right? And they're like, well, we're doing fine. We don't understand why anyone doesn't think this is a great economy.
Exactly, because they look at certain metrics and indicators and think that a lot of the American voters are simply watching unemployment numbers every day. Then, like, the felt economy is the problem.
Yeah.
Right now, inflation is still a massive issue. They don't feel like their wages are keeping up with the costs of goods that they're having to deal with. So this notion of Bidenomics, right? Like, it's been an utter failure. They failed to message it. He's not getting any sort of credit for any of his policies, and quite frankly, because, you know, one of his hallmark policies was the Inflation Reduction Act, which the CBO and everyone else said wasn't going to do a thing to reduce inflation. And then you've seen multiple stories in the last few weeks that, yeah, lo and behold, it did not in fact have any bearing on lowering the rate of inflation. In fact, inflation ticked up month over month just recently. So that's what actual human beings are feeling. That's what moms of four are feeling when they go to the grocery store. The cost of, I've seen recent polling that shows on a state level, in a state like Arizona, that the most concerning area that voters have when it comes to the costs increasing is in food. Not even cars, not anything else. It's food.
That's the
grocery
thing.
Bills.
I think this story is less about is 2024 going to be another 2016. I think it's more about just how disconnected the Democrats have become from actual voters, where they rolled out this Bidenomics thing at the exact moment that you're just getting poll after poll of Americans saying that, like, yes, this feels like it's a terrible economy. We don't understand why the White House keeps telling us that everything is rosy. Meanwhile, like you said, like, food costs have gone through the roof. Like, people are paying over $700 more a month for the same things that they were getting years ago. There's been no increase in their salary to account for that, but at the same time they're paying more. I think now for Dems to only come to this conclusion now is really interesting to me. I wonder if they're trying to use this other, all these other issues that Biden has as maybe let's try to do the switcheroo. Like, bring in Newsom. You saw Newsom was in the news. There's that whole situation with Dianne Feinstein where he's trying to walk this line of, okay, he's promised the same way that Joe Biden promised he would pick a black woman for his vice president. Newsom made a promise that if it comes to it, he would replace Dianne Feinstein with a black woman. And then he said, but it's not going to be Barbara Lee. I think you see this situation where he realizes, okay, I may get called up to the majors, so I need to like walk this thin line, make the right decisions, because I mean, I don't even know if Biden's going to make it to the finish line. Like, there's no hope of him being able to have, like, I know that it was in the news that Dr. Jill Biden's got COVID, but I don't think he's going to be able to run from the basement again.
Yeah, and that's the thing. This being president of the United States is a bright spotlight on you. Actually, being the president's a whole lot different than being a candidate for president. And right now, he's suffering from an intense media scrutiny that comes with anyone who would be in this role. And he's not going to be able to avoid. They're not going to be able to hide what is a very natural process. He's aging. Yeah. He's struggling to keep up with the pace of American media, where you actually have to communicate on a daily basis with the people you were elected to represent. You can't just rely on Karine Jean-Pierre to come out and give some jumbled answer on whatever issue of the day might be, or dispatch Pete Buttigieg or another cabinet official, or better yet, Kamala Harris. Right? Yeah. I know. I love how they've done this whole like Kamala 2.0. It is like a direct ripoff from Veep.
Yeah,
it's like
it really is.
like Veep 2.0 when Dan told Selena about the whole new unveiling of herself. That's what they've gone to with Kamala Harris.
Come on, it's like 5.0. The number of times they've tried that reboot. However, speaking of failed reboots, did you see the story about Jen Granholm in the news? Folks, I'm talking about this. This is from NPR. When Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm set out on a 4-day electric vehicle road trip this summer, she knew charging might be a challenge, but she probably didn't expect anyone to call the cops. Granholm's trip through the Southeast from Charlotte to Memphis was intended to draw attention to the billions of dollars the White House is pouring into green energy and clean cars. Though this draws attention not the way that they thought it would. It says the administration's ambitious energy agenda is successful, could significantly cut U.S. emissions and reshape Americans' lives in fundamental ways. Sure can. Including by putting many more people in electric vehicles. On town hall stops along her road trip, Granholm made a passionate, optimistic case for this transition. But here's what actually happened. Between stops, Granholm's entourage at times had to grapple with the limitations of the present. Like when her caravan of EVs, including a luxurious Cadillac Lyric, a hefty Ford F-150, and an affordable Bolt, were planning to fast charge in Grovetown, a suburb of Augusta, Georgia. Her advance team realized there weren't going to be enough plugs to go around. One of the station's 4 chargers was broken and others were occupied, so an energy department staffer tried parking a non-electric vehicle by one of those working chargers to reserve a spot for the approaching Secretary of Energy. That did not go down well. A regular gas-powered car blocking the only free spot for the charger. In fact, a family that was boxed out on a sweltering day with a baby in the vehicle was so upset they decided to get the authorities involved. They called the police. This is like something out of Veep. You could not make this up. They're trying to highlight how great electric vehicles are. Turns out they're a pain in the ass. They had to use like a gas-powered car to block out a spot for her to charge as she approaches, and they end up boxing in a family with like the baby crying on a sweltering day. You couldn't even write a better joke for this.
I can think of no more egregious action by any campaign advance staffer than preventing a family with a young baby in the car from getting access to a charger that will allow them to then move on and get the hot baby out of a hot car. We're all talking about how hot things have been in different areas throughout the country, and here they are, official government staffers blocking a family with a baby in a hot car.
And also, what I love is they just glossed over the fact that yes, there are gas-using vehicles in this caravan because they wanted to make sure everything worked correctly. They're like, okay, well, we got to make sure no matter what, she's safe. Everything goes fine. We got to have Suburbans that run on gas, make sure everything actually works. We don't know if we're going to run into any issues at charging stations, which they ended up doing. But they're like, okay, now use the car that works here to actually block out a spot. And it ends up blocking out a family with the kid crying in the back because it's burning hot. I mean, this is another perfect situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, I'm gonna take a guess, and chances are I might be right given where the Democrats pull from when it comes to hiring staffers. But this must be maybe an Ivy League educated government
totally.
staffer, and they just obviously can't deal with conflict resolution. It's also like, hey, if the family's upset, maybe move the car, and so that the crying baby will be able to move on and go to their
They're in
destination.
Georgia, and they're like, I went to Dartmouth, when this family's like, what the hell are you doing here? Like it's a typical situation, and to me, it basically shows the exact energy policy that they're trying to highlight, where you see polling where Americans actually don't want to buy electric cars. They do not want to buy them, but it's being forced on them as more restrictions are being put on traditional cars. This administration is trying to force Americans to go electric, and all they've ended up doing on this road trip is highlighting the problems that electric cars actually face. What else could be expected from this administration?
Well, this is what happens when Democrats go out to real America and have to interact with different people who have other issues that are, troubling their lives, have other responsibilities that they have to deal with. I remember talking to several official office staffs in different governor's offices when I was working at the RGA about how concerned they were with the string that was attached to the federal funds for the EV vehicles, for EVs, to build the charging stations, where it was required that they do it every 50 miles. Well, practically speaking, it was not possible. A state like Wyoming had to ask for a workaround because it just wasn't feasible. This is a state that has wildlife overpasses, so cattle can go across their highways. I don't think the federal government, when they implemented this plan, had any idea that there would be places that are so rural that they can't actually adhere to the guidelines that were issued. Just underscores how disconnected they are from so many of these different places outside of major cities or major metropolitan areas.
And that's the thing, is right here it says this is right outside of Augusta, Georgia. If anywhere, I would think has availability for electric car chargers, it'd be Augusta, right outside the Masters. You think you have hundreds of PJs that fly in every year for the Masters. I'd imagine you have the audience and the clientele and the population that would want a lot of electric chargers. But if it can't work there, if they're facing issues where the energy secretary is having to have people block off our charger, I don't know how it works for the rest of it. Like you said, in rural parts of this country, the majority of this country, which are rural, I don't know how they hope to get it to work. But I think, the trip ended up highlighting this administration's policy, just not in the way that they imagined. So this next story, I'm really excited to get into. This is something I first saw the Journal reported on this, and I instantly sent it to McDaniel. I was like, okay, I have to cover this for Tuesday's episode. Folks, there has been a mysterious discovery in the ocean. This is from Business Insider. It says, ocean explorers found a golden orb on the Alaskan seafloor, and they have no idea what it is. It says, this is from the Business Insider story. Earth's oceans are vast and mysterious, and scientists have yet to describe roughly 91% of its species. That's terrifying when you think about it. 91% of what's down there we don't even know about. It's not entirely surprising, then, that deep-sea explorers just found something entirely new during an Alaskan expedition. But this particular object, which looks like the remains of some type of golden orb or egg, surprised scientists. Quote, I don't know what to make of that, said a researcher during a live stream of the expedition. The mysterious object that resembles a reject from Willy Wonka's chocolate factory was discovered on August 30th as part of the Seascape Alaska 5 expedition that's using a remotely operated vehicle to map the Alaska seafloor. The team that found it is with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, Ocean Exploration. So I'll just cut to the chase. I mean, folks who are on YouTube, you are seeing on your screen right now, it's kind of like a cross between a golden egg and the aliens from Aliens 3, like one of those monster things. And they think it could possibly be an egg. We have no idea what this is, and they sent the rover to go prod and pick this thing up. This is going to end in tears. If I have ever seen a situation that's something, I mean, look at this. This is horrific. Something terrible is going to happen as a result of what is this? to begin with.
I gotta say, what a power play by the ocean folks. What a power play by oceanographers. They realized that this was the summer of UFOs, right? That had a groundswell of support behind it. You had a lot of people talking about it. Now, all of a sudden, how do we change the narrative? Let's just find a golden orb. Like, oh, hey, wait a minute.
That's a good point.
Wait a minute. Let's bring some back attention.
If you're big
Let's
ocean,
thunder.
you're like, okay, all this talk of UFOs, don't like it was brought up in the presidential debate. How do we change the narrative? How do we get it back? You think it's a plant? You think they planted?
I think there's a healthy dose of skepticism behind this golden orb. I mean, you had Aaron Rodgers on Hard Knocks talking about his own personal UFO experience. You had it in the presidential debate, right? You gotta bring some attention back home, right? 91% of it is unexplored. Oceanographers and
that's a terrifying.
The ocean stands. They're like, wait a minute, we need a little bit of love too.
When they say like 91% of the creatures in the ocean have yet to be discovered, first off, that's a horrific statistic. Like, how have we allowed this to happen? Why are people not down there in the oceans? Why have we not killed, eaten every species that we can find down there? That's why we end up with situations like this. To me, I thought of this. I was like, why is it people have not discovered what the hell this could be to begin with? And it's 100% because all this like environmental bullshit of like, we can't go down there. We can't scrape the ocean floor. We can't find out what's good to eat. We can't find out what's happening down there. The same way that all these movies have come out being like, no more whale hunts, which we know whales are a renewable resource. Like, I mean, that's a given. But this is yet another example. Like, if you don't know what the hell kind of animal this is, it could be anything. It could do anything to us.
Yeah, it kind of gives you hope that Atlantis might be real, right?
I mean,
kind of gives you hope.
A golden egg at the bottom of the ocean, and I think
maybe there's more of it.
To me, there's a reason that mainstream media is not talking about this. I mean, this is a very weird thing to happen. Like, you saw that thing got vacuumed up by the little robot. They bring it to land, and it's still like just this deformed egg. And what I want to know is, why didn't they cut the damn thing open? What's in there? Why don't we know what's in there?
You're asking the right questions.
That's the thing.
Those are the questions they don't want to answer.
That's 100%.
But also the ocean folks, they have to still maintain some degree of ambiguity here because they want that attention to remain on them. They can't have it revert back to the hot UFO summer. They do not want it back,
dude. I buy into that. That's a really good point. That did not occur to me. Big Ocean 100% would love to use something like this to get themselves front and center. I don't know. Something's up with that. I don't think it's normal. I think this is going to end in tears. I think something horrible is down there. I don't know why this administration hasn't done anything about this. That is not normal. That is something weird. That's something terrifying. We should cut it open. We should find out what's in there, and we should get the rest of the things that make that.
I mean, Biden's lucky he's able to put his shoes on in the morning. You think you think he's read in on the gold orb that Big Ocean discovered?
So this topic right here, that we're about to jump into, this is my favorite. Speaking of horrible creatures, journalism is the most regretted college degree. This graphic is incredible. This is coming to us from CNBC. This is the percentage of graduates who would pick a different major if they could. Journalism, 87%. 87% of people who go into journalism wish they would have picked a different major if they could. And that, number two is sociology at 72%. So 15% higher is journalism.
It's pretty overwhelming. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, honestly, if you want to, you want to round up, like, so you round up 10 journalists, like 9 of them just completely regret having ever studied that in college. And like, look, as somebody who, deals with a lot of folks who are journalism majors, I think sometimes what makes a good journalist is somebody who has a kind of a breadth of experience in different areas that aren't necessarily particular to the whole editorial process or some of the methods that they might study in journalism school. Like, just what's the best way to get an education in journalism? Go talk to people.
I think that's
go to 3 or 4 different places a year that you wouldn't otherwise visit on a vacation. And I think that's because the way that the system of promotion has been broken. Now kids out of journalism school just come to some place here in DC and sit on Twitter all day and write breaking news stories. They're breaking news reporters, which is code for whatever's getting engagement on Twitter, instead of going out to, go to Miami and cover the city council, go to, go to Springfield, Illinois, and cover the state house, right? Cover actual other issues happening in states around America, and just gradually build your way up, and it'll, I think that's a better degree that you could get in journalism than actually like studying it in school.
Well, that's the thing is, I think a lot of this regret comes from exactly what you're describing, is because journalism as it once was, of like reporting the news, reporting the facts, and like the whole ethos of like, okay, we want to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted, that's all out the window. It's all, they just want like the Taylor Lorenz model, like you were saying, of like, I want as many followers on TikTok and Instagram as possible. I'm not going to be reporting on like what matters in people's lives. I'm going to report on what can get me the most clicks, dropping these like horrific takes. That's basically what their business model has become. And the journalism schools themselves aren't free from any of the blame. Like you look at the top journalism schools, you think of like, Columbia or Metal or UNC. This is essentially just like left-wing training camps, right? Where all the journalism takes now essentially are just like, okay, we are either going to independently create talkers for the Dems, or we're basically going to take Dem talkers that their comms directors send us and run with that as if it were news. So the whole industry itself is on its head, and I think almost irredeemable at this point.
The incentive structure is broken, and some of the best reporters, some of the best journalists I've ever worked with, you've never heard of.
Yeah.
Because of that incentive structure, where people like Taylor Lorenz, who are not real journalists, are overshadowing those that are doing the right thing, that are doing good work. I often get asked by people who don't work in politics, like, what is it like to work with a lot of reporters? I go, a lot of times the best reporters you'll see, like that you'll see on TV, some of the ones that you do, like, they don't actually report things out. But then other times there are those that do. There are some who get unfairly criticized, and I know that because it's like, hey, yeah, actually, like, they like make a good faith effort to call Republicans. I know for a fact that they talk to a lot of Republicans. There are some now, and that's the most alarming part. I would love to sit in on a journalism class. I would today. Like, what does the class of 2024 journalism students, like, what are they actually studying? Are they reaching out to like sources? Are they reaching out to Republicans to get their perspective? Because that's really important. It's one thing to write a story, but as long as at least we have our side reflected, that's a huge value to getting in a more accurate piece in front of the American public.
And it's really interesting to say that, because like I think a lot of the problem, number one, with modern journalism is they're on Twitter and they see the feedback that they get as like their guiding star as being a reporter. So their replies, if they say anything that's critical of a Democrat, is they will see like, oh wow, trying to both sides this argument, which is this bad faith argument essentially that just says if you're conservative, your views are invalid. They'll hit reporters with this constantly of like, oh wow, how can you try to report both sides on this, of trying to be essentially fair and balanced? And then the journalist sees themselves getting ratio and they're like, oh God, I should, I guess, stop talking to Republicans and start just going with essentially what's become, the slack at work telling me just push left-wing, talkers.
You had a good reporter who dared to question whether or not John Fetterman was capable of executing the duties of a United States Senator, and then reported on what she was seeing during their interview, and she got criticized for it. Why? Like,
absolutely, I remember. And then absolutely destroyed.
Like, we're all watching this with our own two eyes, and then we saw what happened when he actually joined the Senate. We saw what happened on the debate stage. This was prior to those debates, when then suddenly everyone's like, well, why were they criticizing her? Because you had someone who was a very prominent journalist, Kara Swisher, who has, a massive microphone.
I wouldn't call Kara a journalist, but yes, she's a prominent left-wing.
She went out and attacked him, and like, that's the sort of thing where it's like, that's fundamentally broken. Look, I could go on all day, because there are also some things that are happening on our side that aren't helpful to the reporter communications operative relationship, right? Like, we all, at the end of the day, we have to find a way to succeed for our party. To succeed, and sometimes that does mean having a conversation with a reporter, not just ignoring them, but they also have to make sure that they're reaching out.
So from your experience, you deal with a lot of reporters. So it says 87% of journalism majors regret it, would pick a different major if they could. How much of that do you think is self-loathing? Because to me, that strikes me as like a huge part of this.
That is remarkable that many regret it. I think some would probably rather just have issue expertise in something better. Like,
I mean, that's the thing is, to me, like, a lot of the journalism
economics.
now is just like there's no subject matter expertise whatsoever.
Correct.
It's like, you're in Brooklyn, you're in your shitty apartment that you're paying way too much for, just like dropping takes to get ratioed until you follow the company line on Twitter.
Because you used to have to go and report on different subjects, right? You might be the environment reporter for the Miami Herald. You might be somebody who's covering transportation at the LA Times, right? Like, you start off at a certain level and you understand how policy is made. You understand like how the process works, instead of just coming to DC or going to New York and sitting on Twitter and just looking at things that get great engagement. Like, oh, let's write that up because, some random bot account with like 300,000 followers tweeted something and it has, now it has like, 900 views. Like, that makes you less informed. Whereas I think a lot of journalists from a kind of an older era, from a different era, bygone era, if you want to call it that, actually had to go out and like get issue subject matter expertise in all these different areas. So now I think if I look at that number, there's probably a lot of them who are saying, hey, yeah, I'd be better off, getting more information on different areas that allow me to more accurately report on issues so that I understand it all as I'm being pitched stories, or as I'm consuming information, as I'm watching these policy debates play out in states or on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a huge part of the problem is, you'll hear these stories of where even journalists themselves are lamenting, like, oh, God, it's the death of local news. You don't have good local reporting on, like, the state level. That's because the whole paradigm has changed for what these kids want coming out of school. They do not want to go to, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and grind it out at the State House level, build a fundamental understanding of how politics works, and then work their way up, eventually maybe get to the Washington Post. They want the first job out of college to be the Washington Post. And actually, there are kids who are ending up in these situations where, like, I know, every campaign cycle, NBC News does a thing where they're like, hey, here's our new class of, campaign reporters straight out of college. We're throwing them on the road. Now these kids are going to be dropping takes while they're out with their phones on the campaign trail. I know you have to deal with these folks, but at the same time, like, that's journalism now. It's like a kid fresh from college who's just got, a smartphone and a dream, dropping takes from the road.
If you do that job right, and I know a lot that have, because one of my first jobs was working up in New Hampshire with a lot of those embeds on a presidential. And you get a great opportunity to interact with a lot of people who go to different events. So you can make the most of those opportunities as long as you're actually talking to people, try to have a better understanding of why the electorate's moving in a certain direction, why some applause lines, why some policy ideas are actually resonating with voters of a particular party or with independent voters, whatever it may be. You just have to make the most of the time there. I would say I'm a little concerned here that communications majors are at fourth. I'm gonna have to look into that a little bit deeper. I have no regrets, but
yeah, I don't see.
I must be one of the four that doesn't have a regret for majoring in that subject.
So this actually ends up being like a two-pronged story. So this goes into what CNBC had an article when they were discussing this information right here, where they said that some experts say the value of a bachelor's degree is fading and more emphasis should be directed towards career training. I think this is a huge story. We've heard it a little bit. You'll hear this from folks like J.D. Vance, some other good conservatives who are pointing out the fact that there for so long has been this stigma on, quote, trade schools, right? Mm-hmm. Where you actually learn how to do something, as opposed to something like journalism where 87% of the people regret it. You actually learn a skill and you end up making, I think a lot of that 87% as well is, for the vast majority of journalists, you're not making a great wage and you're probably based in a city that's expensive, right? So that's like a double whammy for you, as opposed to all these Americans who make the choice that I'm going to go to a trade school. HVAC is a classic example. Like, there are folks who decided to focus on HVAC getting out of high school who are just making it rain. They're getting six figures, living in a wonderful suburb, excellent quality of life. You know, you've got a wife, you've got kids, you've got disposable income. You actually know how to do something, as opposed to just like, I just drop takes in the Slack and on Twitter and call myself a journalist. And for so long, that's been looked down on. You know, there was this, I think this is part of the reason why you hear all these like lefties saying that, like, oh God, we need to have our college debt forgiven. Number one, you made that choice on your own. You signed that contract. Number two, when you choose to go into something like the second most regarded sociology, how are you going to pay for that student loan?
Yeah.
How are you going to pay for that student loan?
It's a failure by those academic advisors to not properly prepare their students for life after college, what the actual earning potential might be, and that's going to factor into it.
But here's the thing is, I think, that academic advisor, their incentive, well, at the college at least, their incentive is like, okay, well, let's keep the kid here. It doesn't matter how long it takes them to graduate. Every year that they're here, we're getting paid. Like, the college is getting paid either way, whether it's by the kid themselves, whether by his parents, whether it's by the loan that's taken out. The college is getting paid. Like, we are not looking at all towards that issue of where colleges, like the growth in the expenditures of colleges for why it's gotten so expensive is not because professors are asking for more money or kids are getting better quality of education. Because they're getting pumped full of like administrators that they have to pay for. Like, okay, we've got the DEI, officer here on campus who's pulling down 120 grand that kids now have to pay for, and we've got 50 of them. And so now they want student loan forgiveness, as opposed to, why forego taking that student loan in the first place and actually learning a skill in a trade, which, I mean, for so long it's been stigmatized. And it turns out that those folks, like in the CNBC article, they say themselves that, when you see these statistics that say that over a lifetime, a 4-year degree is the way to go in terms of earning potential, that's because they include, STEM degrees in there. So, of course, if you're going in like engineering, if you're becoming a nuclear scientist or something, you're going to do great. But if you remove those, that's the problem. And that's exactly what you're seeing on this list of people who regret their major, with 87% of journalists. I just can't get over that number. And, now I understand why they're just such horrific, bitter people. Honestly, like 87% of any group that says I've made a horrible choice, they can't be happy people. And yet those are the folks who tell us what's what.
I'm with you on the focus and the shift back toward, workforce development, empowering people. It's let the free enterprise system work.
Yeah.
One really interesting thing you've seen from several different Republican governors, and I know Governor Ducey out in Arizona did this, who has a new group that's focused on free enterprise. But during his time as governor, the occupational licensing reform, which again, none of this stuff is going to generate clicks on Twitter, but this actually improves people's lives. Talking about investing in workforce development, giving somebody who does not want to go to college an opportunity to start an HVAC company, or work in that for 10, 12 years, gain considerable amount of experience, understand how the business works, then launch their own business, and then employ 10 people. Somebody who wants to be an electrician, right? Like, who, at the end of the day, we're still going to need more electricians. We're still going to need plumbing. We're still going to need all these critical services, because the other stunning fact is because as things have gotten easier in society, we've stopped learning things. Yeah, we've started to rely more on
let me Google that. Like, I can just learn this from Google.
Yeah, instead of like actually learning it so that you can solve these issues yourself. So we're going to always need people who can provide these services, and that's obviously there are going to be people who want to get college degrees, and that should be an option. It shouldn't be the only option to get a wage that you can raise a family on, and then if their kids want to go to college because that's their choice, then great, then you have the resources to help them pay for that, or whatever it might be. Just opening up other avenues for people to achieve the American dream.
That's it. And to go with this whole story that we had on 87% of journalists regret that, in my opinion, this is a bit more fake news. This is a story from U.S. News that says that Switzerland is #1 in the 2023 U.S. News Best Countries ranking. It says Switzerland has retained its top spot in U.S. News and World Report's annual Best Countries ranking, marking the second year in a row and the 6th time overall the Central European nation is placed #1. small landlocked country, is followed by Canada at number 2, Sweden at number 3, Australia at number 4, and the U.S. at 5, which is down a spot from 2022 in the latest edition of the analysis. This is ridiculous to begin with. To my knowledge, there is no, migrant crisis happening on the borders of Switzerland, Canada, Sweden, or Australia. It seems like, if we have tons of people at the border fighting to get into the country, this maybe is the best place possible. For this ranking, it just seems patently absurd. I mean, I think everyone knows this is the best country on earth. To me, this is kind of like, one of these like lib contrarian takes of like, oh, I'm mad at America kind of bullshit of like, okay, the U.S. is number 5 on earth by what metric? This is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, it's like Aaron Sorkin, wrote this from some scene of the newsroom, RIP. Look, you hear harrowing stories every day of migrants who are seeking a better life for their family and go through absolute hell in order to make it here. Or not just migrants too, but just think about all of the different folks
people who actually legally try
from across the world who come here to use the American higher education system, or even the secondary education, right? Like, think about all the people who come here to get an education, ultimately want to stay here because we are a very prosperous, we offer a very prosperous society, a way to get ahead in life. Some of these metrics, I mean, Europe ranking that high. I mean, Switzerland.
I really want to get so this is directly from the article. It says the best countries rankings and analysis from U.S. News are formed in partnership with Global Marketing, and Wharton School of Business, UPenn. Of course, you got an Ivy League saying that America is not the best, but it says this is a global survey in which more than 17,000 people across 36 nations associate various countries with specific attributes ranging from, quote, dynamic, safe, and a leader to cares about human rights, economically stable, and committed to social justice. I mean, to me, that right there explains 100% how this bullshit happens. I remember like a couple of years ago where it was like journalists were pushing the story of like America is like the second or third most dangerous country on earth for journalists. This is back when Trump was president. So of course they're like, oh my God, I could have some mean tweets directed at me. I'm persecuted. This is probably the worst place on earth. I think that falls in line exactly with what's happening here. Is they're like, oh, it falls in line with social justice. This is essentially just like a DEI ranking.
Metrics that other people who are of the same mindset deem important to coming up with a ranking system.
Yeah.
It's
the Journos have run amok yet again, and the University of Pennsylvania
and the academics who
it's all the worst people have combined to say that America's number 5.
Talk about groupthink. Talk to an academic.
Yeah.
Just listen to I, as somebody who obviously we both went and got our college degrees, and we spent a lot of time sitting in the classrooms of different professors, and there's not a whole lot of professors who are open to disagreement or who welcome contrarian opinions or different perspectives on things. And so that's key. That
and it could only be that group that would put Canada at number 2, which is just like no person in Canada themselves would be like, we're the second greatest nation on earth. Like, all you hear in the news from Canada is everyone hates Justin Trudeau. The government is doing horrible things. And now there's like state sanctioned suicide. Like, it's such a great country that like the state's now going to pay you to kill yourself. They'll cover the cost of that. So it must be definitely the number 2 greatest country in the world.
This is kind of like when Emmanuel Macron had the audacity to lecture us after the Dobbs decision.
Oh, totally.
And like, buddy.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's going on here? There are a lot of other.
When France has more restrictive abortion laws than the United States.
What are you doing up there on your ivory tower?
But that's the thing. That's exactly the whole situation. Is those are the people dropping these takes. Like, you don't have to be aware of what's actually happening in the country, which is why This is part of the rebuttal. I wanted to pull this up. This is from the BBC on what is happening right now in England. They're giving tips, folks, on how to keep your home cool because, they have not discovered air conditioning yet. In England, they're saying putting a fan by the window will pull in cooler air from outside. And they had to make a graphic. And they said, basically put a bowl of ice in front of the fan. Blowing air over ice will help cool the air being blown through. Well, this sounds like a top-ranking country in my mind. Yeah. It's like 100 degrees. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to put a bowl of ice in front of a fan, and we're going to make number 3 on the list of best countries. This is European technology.
I mean, this would be Bernie Sanders.
What if ice and fan?
This would be like Bernie Sanders America. This would be like his blue sky scenario. He's already, he's up there on the hill now pushing for continued nationalized healthcare. You have, this is like your standard, what life would be like if any of his policies actually came into effect.
So for me, to begin with, I think everyone in England knows what they are. I think they realize that their country, they're basically a Harry Potter theme park, right? Like everyone in the world goes there and they're like, oh, look, it's so charming. Everyone is talking about shillings and pence and, their chimney sweeps and such. And we know Harry Potter comes from there. It doesn't exist as like a real country. Like no one's like, oh, damn, England just did this. Or like, oh, wow, look at what England is up to. No one ever says that. It's all about okay, here's what America's up to. Here's what America's building. So this is from the article. It says, fans are a, quote, relatively cheap and energy efficient way to keep air moving. This is stunning information for the British. It says, and can help you stay cool. Using a freestanding fan costs about 20 pence to 40 pence for continuous use over a 24-hour period, according to the Energy Saving Trust. Again, I have to go back. People say this ranking system has Europe so high, yet their government is telling them try running a fan to keep cool because we know air conditioner technology has not yet arrived on our shores. And number 2, the fact that they have all these energy commissions, Canada's got the suicide commission that I already mentioned, and then England's healthcare system essentially is well, if you have a heart attack, maybe next year we can fit you into an appointment. This is the people who the left looks at as okay, we need to make our society more like that.
I think you were right with the ranking system where Switzerland, I mean it's like a metaphor, right? I'm Switzerland. It's because it's the least confrontational.
Exactly.
It's the least objectionable place. So that of course, your ranking system, what are you actually ranking? What's the actual value attributed to different categories? America's the greatest place on earth where you could go from sweeping streets to being
Brigham, you could be a chimney sweep and become governor.
Yeah, exactly. You can go from from just overnight, right? You want to stack generations after generations, right? But there's really only one place in the world where you can have overnight success through just hard work and determination. If you put your mind to something, you can ultimately give your family more opportunity than you had, and this should be the goal of every parent. That should be the goal of every generation, is to leave the next better off than you had it. That's why it's important for us to stay committed to the free enterprise system where you have those sort of opportunities. And I don't think a rating system like this factors that into the equation at all. It's just hey, do you not offend anyone? Do you not do anything important enough to come on anyone's radar?
Well, when 87% of journos hate themselves, it's pretty clear that they don't want any kind of growth. They don't believe in any of that. But so this final segment I have to get into because I received probably at least 50 messages on Twitter, Instagram, everywhere possible, tagging me in this story. This one is coming from Forbes. It says, flying in peace. This airline is creating an adults-only section. It says, Corendon Airlines, a Turkish-Dutch carrier, is about to launch an, quote, only adult zone on its flights between Amsterdam and the sun-kissed Caribbean island of Curaçao starting on November 3rd, so that grown-ups can savor the joy of a child-free journey. Strategically positioned at the front of the Airbus A350, this new oasis of calm will have 93 seats reserved exclusively for anyone aged 16 plus. Walls and curtains will help maintain its exclusive silence. So 2 things. First off, I think this is a great idea. I've spoken many times about how we should all agree Southwest is where you put the families, the kids, until you have, gotten to the point as a parent where you're willing to discipline your kids and your children understand I have to act responsibly in public. I shouldn't be a nuisance, which is, sadly, it's a lot to ask. An entire generation of kids right now is being raised by an iPad because their parent just doesn't want to deal with it. So when you see them on planes, it's like the kid is freaking out if the iPad's not fully charged, or the kid is freaking out because they're bored. Like, I remember that was completely unacceptable. Number one, to begin with, like being noisy, let alone causing problems for other people in public. For me, not happening. Just the way I was raised, that's 100% not allowed. And I think that's why you're seeing folks try things like this, is because this is a response to, parents, millennial parents, whatever parents, not actually doing their job of parenting the kid and making sure, hey, maybe I should have my child act respectfully in public. That now you're having companies having to pick up the slack and being like, okay, we will create only an adult zone so everyone who's in this area can be sure that you're not going to put up with someone's kid who was raised irresponsibly by parents who handed them an iPad. My problem here is they said walls and curtains will help maintain its exclusive silence. That doesn't work.
No.
Does not work. It's not like
They know who they kidded.
Some magic curtain of like, okay, folks, everyone in the back, the animals, you can't hear them now.
That's like the first class curtain where they're like, yeah, no one else can use the bathroom up there. Everyone just walks through it and uses the bathroom anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to take a lot more than that. So again, I go back to Southwest should become like the universally accepted carrier of like, okay, if you're traveling with the family and you haven't gotten to the point where you've disciplined your children to the point where they can sit on a plane silently, they can travel to the airport silently, use Southwest. Like, we should all agree that's the barn. There's like no rules. You get on Southwest. Like, to my understanding, they don't even have like assigned seats on Southwest. It's basically like, when you get there, you get there. You line up, you have a fist fight, you do whatever it takes, you get on the plane, and it's like finders keepers.
Yeah,
essentially.
And look, I'm sure the listeners are going to have a divided opinion on this. I'm sure your perspective is going to engender some pretty funny responses. But I would say this: look, the biggest thing that most people should take into account is, one, you're dealing with raising the next generation of people. You're dealing with small humans. You're providing a valuable service to society, right? That's apparent. There has to be like a human element to it. The same time, you have to make an effort.
Yeah.
If you aren't making an effort to deal with an unruly child, then that's a failure in your part.
How many times do you remember being on a plane where a kid's just like going ham, losing its mind, wailing, and you see the parents, and it's just indifference and defeat?
There are some that are completely checked out.
They're like, I handed the kid the iPad. Yeah. Why isn't he behaving? I thought that was how this rolls.
I had a wild flight recently. I got an upgrade, so I was in a nice seat. I had a parent hand the kid the iPad, and there were no headphones.
The kid was just like,
there were no headphones behind. There were no headphones. They were just listening.
They're just going Peppa full blast
for probably 15-20 minutes, and then like somebody realized. I think the flight attendant might have walked by and like tapped like the parent who was sitting across from the two kids and said, like, hey. Because all of a sudden, like, I no longer could hear it. I had my headphones in. I just kind of ignored it and wanted to go about my business. But I was like, oh, that's a first. Like, that's a first. Usually there are headphones attached to the iPad to entertain the child as it goes.
I think that's part and parcel of the whole thing, is there's been just this complete loss of kind of respect, of where it's like parents, a lot of parents now, the quote iPad parents are like, give me a break, man. I've got a kid, let the kid blast Peppa Pig on a plane, and if it irritates other people, who cares, man? Give me a break. I'm a parent. It's like, you're a parent if you do the job of a parent, and that includes raising your kid. And having Peppa Pig blasting out their iPad, you're not being a parent at that point. Take care of your job. Your job is to take care of your kids, make sure your kids are doing the right thing. Like, there's become this sense of like entitlement among the iPad parents where they're like, hey, someone else take care, like this is your problem, this is not my problem, and that's what you end up with.
Yeah, or just ignore it. And like that's the one thing I always have a deep degree of sympathy when you see parents who are obviously trying to deal with a child. And like I would say on average, I think
if the kid's a problem, the parent isn't trying.
More kids on a plane than not are behaving. It is a handful that have different issues. The one thing I'm also very sensitive to is like crying babies. The air pressure, man. As an adult, I get my ears.
Same. But that happened when I was a kid too. You do it quietly. You let the parent.
Well, sometimes
this is the thing is like
if a baby can't speak yet, that's the only way they identify like there's a problem.
So then don't put them on the plane. Like that's the thing. There are station wagons. There's ways to travel the country without inconveniencing. That's the thing is like, I remember crystal clear when I was a child. Like if I had ever acted up in public, that was an absolute no. To be like that should be given. Like so much of this, like when you're saying that, like it's one thing if you see the parents actually trying in public. The trying happens before you're in public. At home,
you can't predict.
At home, the child should know.
You can't predict.
Hey, look, there's going to be
pressure.
consequences.
You can't predict the air pressure.
That's why, like, if your kid's going to start wailing, don't put him on the plane. Get in the station wagon. There's so many ways to travel the world, this country, without inconveniencing others. Like the supposition that, like, okay, every iPad parent is, they should be allowed and they're guaranteed to be able to travel wherever they want, even if it inconveniences others, even if their kid's going ham and they've been completely derelict in their duties as a parent. I don't buy that.
I'm going to stand here and defend the parents. I'm going to stand here and defend the parents of young children. But I got to ask you the question: what is your target range for children? Like, what is when you see kids on a plane, when you see parents with children on a plane? What age bracket would you say you're like, we could have a situation on our hands?
So here's the thing: is I don't see like a specific age. I flip that around. I think it should be understood by parents that if I'm traveling with my child, that's kind of it used to be like this. It should be that parent's promise to the public that at the very least, the absolute bottom of the barrel is that my child will not be a problem to you. Like what happened to any sort of like a social contract of like, if I go out in public, I'm not going to be a menace. Like that's the bar. That's the lowest bar you have to clear as a human being. And so as a parent, that still applies to you because here's the wild word that most of these iPad parents have never heard of. It's responsibility. You're responsible for the child. Don't get on the plane if you think your kid might be a problem. Have some responsibility. Have some self-respect because everyone's looking at you. The kid's wailing. You're not doing anything about it. Everyone's looking at you. Do you know why? Because you messed up.
But what about the parents that are making an effort to like console the child or quiet the child down, or they had a momentary episode where there was a little...
Again, all that should happen at home before the flight. If you don't have absolute confidence in the child behaving correctly and respectfully as a child should in public, don't get on that plane. Like that's how does that even need to be explained? And the problem is that requires discipline and work, which is why all these parents have checked out on it.
What are your thoughts about children in first class?
If they can meet that bar, then absolutely. Like you have to like. I can't stress this enough. I very specifically remember, especially with the ear popping thing. I remember when I would travel with my parents, we'd take flights. I mean, I was a tiny little kid. They'd always hand us a stick of gum on takeoff and landing because that helps with the ear popping. Yeah. Like, it's incumbent upon parents to be responsible for the behavior of the children, not the public. We're not raising your kids. You're supposed to raise your kids.
But that infant who cannot yet speak, and the parents might not know that there is an issue.
Don't take them on the plane.
Because not every flight path is the same. Like air pressure,
you should not be like, I don't know what my kid's gonna do. You know what I mean? Like I don't know what's gonna happen.
I mean that's literally raising a child.
But that's the thing is it's not.
It's like 22 years of not necessarily knowing what's gonna happen.
If you don't know what your kid is gonna do, you've already failed. I think like. Parenting is I dictate to the child the behavior. That should be the relationship. That was the relationship for me. It's like, parents tell you what to do. That seems very simple. And that's why I think, that slippery slope we see now in California where they're like, no, the child answers to the state. We can take the kid from the parents. I think that's the whole thing is like, okay, well, if the parents aren't, going to be the absolute, voice of reason and that they can have control of the child, someone else is going to step in. And you damn well don't want it to be the state.
I will always stand by the side of parents who make an attempt, who have to travel to far locations and do not have the ability to do a 24-hour, cross-country drive or a 15-hour drive with a child in a car. It's oftentimes oftentimes harder.
Here's the other thing: leave them with grandma. Grandma would
what if they're traveling
love
to see grandma?
the kids.
What if they're bringing? You're big.
Bring grandma. Bring grandma.
One of your lines
Grandma
for a
can
very
hop
long
on the
time.
plane.
Grandma does not want pancakes. Grandma does not want new technology.
Yeah.
All grandma wants
is
grandchildren.
Yeah.
So but you got to bring those grandchildren to them if they're
fly grandma in. If your kids are going ham, fly grandma in.
What if grandma can't make those trips anymore? She's
put her in a station wagon.
There's
the thing is that like there is always a better way than having the public be subjected to your wild kids because you lack the ability to instill discipline.
Do you think they should bring Navy to the White House?
Bring who?
Navy.
Is that
the hunters?
Oh, the
hunter
stripper baby? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Bring the stripper. I fully support that.
They should definitely bring, but they should bring Navy to fly Navy up here to DCA. Let's get her to the White House.
Amazing take. Excellent take. Well, I think we did it. Absolute banger of an episode. Thank you so much to my special co-host, Jesse Hunt. No thanks to Ashbrook, Duncan, and Holmes, who yet again are on vacation. I hope you're enjoying your time off. And thank you so much to the minions, especially those who are watching us on YouTube if you're not yet subscribed. So, until next time, minions, keep the faith, hold the line, and own the libs. We'll see you on Thursday. Stay ruthless.